I see the work of your hands, galaxies spinning a heavenly dance. Oh God, all that you are,
Over the years,
so
people have tried
overwhelming.
to search for acceptable ways to live in a society. Since most of our conduct causes separation, discrimination, and division to us. In the case of a graduate who was employed as an accountant in a banking firm, he was given accommodation with a car. This to ease him from stress in his work. During his second year in the bank, he was arrested and imprisoned for 5 years for an act of fraudulence. He stole money from the bank. Now the question is, how can a man, after being given all the necessary resources, go ahead to steal from his employer? When confusion sets in families because parents think the adolescents are going astray, yet doesn't know what to do, and the youth also think we know our right. There is something wrong. There are certain truths that has not been told, what we should have known. Let's pass the truth to the next generation and even to our generation. Let's teach them early what we learned late, what we discovered, even that which we were not taught. The time is always right to do what is right, said by Martin Luther King Jr. It is never late when you decide to do something right. Even though you may have wanted to do something last year, it's still not late to do it now. So if you decide to do something new today, it's always right, but it's always bad or wrong when you fail to do something new, even though you know it's right. Now the question is, what is morality? Observe the key words. Morality is the recognition of the distinction between good and evil, or between right and wrong, respect for and obedience to the rules of right conduct. Let's take another definition. It is the mental disposition or characteristic of behaving in a manner intended to produce morally good result. Now let's look into it in detail. Morality talks about your ability to draw a line between right and wrong, good and evil, acceptable and unacceptable deeds, and your willingness to strive to meet societal moral expectation makes you a complete person. Now let's observe the key words in them. Draw a line talks about being able to recognize sin or to recognize wrong and right, bad and good, acceptable and unacceptable. Morality talks about ability. You should have the ability, the skill to draw a line. You should be able to identify right and you should be able to identify wrong. And also, you should be willing to make a decision. That means if you are able to identify good from bad, you should be willing to do the right thing. The society expects from you to do something right. So if you are able to distinguish between the right and wrong, you should be willing to do that which is right. Now, some elements of morality. We have honesty, respect, ethics, and integrity. A moral person should exhibit the character of honesty. The person should observe ethics. The person should be respectful or respect others. The person should have integrity. Aspect of morality. Morality is an inferred thing. It's something that starts from within. We think about something every day, and before we express it, it's something we think about it or we process it in our mind. Then before we can judge it or call it moral or immoral, we see it through action. So morality can be said to be an action. And the action comes in two forms. It can be moral or immoral. That is right or wrong. Now let's look at moral and ethics. Unlike moral, ethics has a standard code of right and wrong, which is internationally accepted or observed. But compared to moral, it is a decision agreed by a group, a religion, or a certain people or an individual believe in a certain thing and they hold dear to that. But taking the two into consideration, they define what is considered acceptable behavior for the individual or the group. We live in a global world. We live in a global world where technology is now the age and provides to us many things, both positive and negative, good and bad. What are the things your world is presenting to you? Are you accepting the good things or the bad ones? We are in a generation where many people have adopted a way of life and they are leading others into such ways of life. Now we can see a generation being trained to live a certain way of life which is not morally accepted. So we can observe this video and the conduct being acted thereof, where children has been brainwashed to do things which they will go to become. So as we can see, the children don't know what they are doing, but they have been forced to do certain things by some elderly ones. So these children will grow to develop this kind of attitude which will not be acceptable to society. Now let's look at some immoral behaviors. I've grouped them into three. The first one is personal. Let's take some examples of that. Bad temperament. This happens when an individual, by his nature, offends others, where he or she realizes it, but decide not to do anything about it because he sees it to be normal. Selfishness. This happens when the individual wants everything for himself or herself. This affects the close relatives of the person and even the society in general. The next one is pride, where the individual doesn't humble himself or herself and will not take advice from anyone and continue to do whatever he or she pleases. And greed, which is also another example of immoral behavior, where the individual seeks to have everything for himself or herself and will never want to give anything out to others. Society. In the society where we have the media, which comprises of the print, online, and the broadcast, where we see all kinds of images in the print media, online, and the broadcast, and many other information and news we hear all over, which expose the individual to bad acts or to learn bad things from the world. Since the world has become a global village, a small place where information is easy to access, knowingly and unknowingly. Wrong role models. This is where the individual sets for himself or herself a person he or she like and want to become like him or her, where the person shows a behavior which is not morally acceptable to a society. In this case, the individual is likely to learn such behavior or attitude. Then wrong parenting, where some parents act irresponsibly and will not advise, train, or provide necessary information and materials for their wards. Last one, let's look at the religion, where some immoral behaviors can be seen from false teachings. Some people provide false teachings in our generation, which brainwash many into all kinds of immoral behaviors. Promiscuity, where the individual has learned a lot of bad things and therefore has become addicted to and behave immorally, such as prostitution, adultery, fornication. Even in the church, all these things are happening. Now let's look at some indecent ways of dressing. Who is sexy? This is a question most young people ask and comment on social media. This is what young people allow their pictures to be used for. They spend a lot of time on social media chatting and commenting over this kind of things, which takes a lot of their time. Most ladies admire their beauty, hence expose their body. They describe themselves saying, "I am smart and hot," forgetting they are exposing their nakedness to public. which is not morally acceptable. Most of them learned this from childhood and they grew with it. So now that they are adults, they find it difficult to stop this kind of behavior. Most ladies nowadays expose themselves in public without any shy because they feel like they look good in whatever they wear. Therefore, they expose themselves to public, which is immoral, but that's what they feel like doing, which is not morally acceptable. They expose themselves wearing all kind of dress. Some don't put on dresses which cover most part of their bodies. Some also wear dresses that are transparent. Also, there is drug abuse. Curiosity leads people into selling and using drugs. They become addicted to drugs after using or testing them. This affects them in many ways. At a point, they realize it's hurting, but they are not able to overcome. Even though it's not morally right, they continue doing it. Peer influence. Peer influence themselves into doing drugs. Although drugs are dangerous, addicted people find it difficult to resist. Ladies nowadays use shisha thinking it's not harmful or hard to use. This affects them in many ways. After using it for a long time, they become addicted and are not able to resist from using it. This ends up destroying their lives. There is also instant justice. Many are seen to be wicked or bad by others, hence they act wickedly against them because they think they are either armed robbers or bad people in the society they want to get rid of. They end up hurting innocent ones. This affects our society, our way of life. This act is immoral. This attitude ends up killing innocent people and destroy their lives. It also hurt the families and relatives of the victim, since he or she may be innocent. Why do people develop immoral behaviors? Let's look at two ways of that. Self-decision. Some individuals decide to indulge in such behaviors because of some examples we've cited above, like selfishness, greed, pride. This leads the individual to live immorally. So we call it self-decision. Then we have external influence, where the individual is influenced by society, either by the media or friends, to live a certain way of life which is not acceptable by society. Let's look at how people develop immoral behaviors. 1. Curiosity, where individuals attempt to use or try anything they set their eyes on to experience how it is. Some people test anything they chance upon, like drugs, dressing, and many others. 2. Envy. Some people develop the attitude of liking anything they see. Some people want to have everything they set their eyes on for themselves, even when it doesn't belong to them or they don't have them. This leads them into other bad ways of having them. It also leads them to harm others because they want it at all costs. 3. Ignorance. Because some people don't have enough knowledge, they look up to musicians, movie actors, and many others, and this affects them in many ways when those people lead them into immoral acts. Now let's look at some reasons why people must overcome immoral behaviors. To avoid regret, because of the attitude of people, it ends them in many bad ways, and this can cause them to regret later. To avoid disgrace, the bad attitude by people can end them disgrace. It can also lead them into death, rejection, and punishment. To attain aspirations, self-esteem, fulfillment in one's life, and also become useful in the society. When one overcomes immoral behavior, he or she becomes useful to the society. He or she is able to help the younger generation to also overcome immoral behaviors. Now let's look at how people can overcome immoral behaviors. 1. Must be able to draw a line between right and wrong. People must be willing to avoid wrong deeds and appreciate the good. 2. Must be able to resist any external influence. People must be able to resist people who attempt to influence them immorally. A lot of people tend to influence others negatively. This affects them a lot. From the image, a lot of social activities go on. Example, like alcoholism, smoking, indecent dressing, violence, gossip, and others. But the individual must be focused on his purpose and goals and not be confused on which choice to make. Since the individual has a purpose, the individual must be focused and move ahead. One has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws, as said by Martin Luther King Jr. One has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. Our society sometimes sets rules or laws which are not morally right, and the individual has the moral responsibility to disobey such laws, even though it may come with a cost. How people can overcome immoral behaviors. One of the ways by which the individual can overcome immoral behavior is to be assertive. People must be able to say no without fear or shyness. 2. Must develop Christian attitude. People must develop a prayer life and seek God's guidance in His Word. The Word of God enlightens the individual, and it is proper for us to seek God's guidance in His Word. This helps the individual to abstain from many kinds of immoral behaviors and also secures him from danger. Let's look at some spiritual influence on immorality. 1. Demonic decree. Some individuals pronounce bad things for themselves. They never see anything good happen to them. For that matter, they always think negative and say negative things about themselves. 2. Personal conduct. The attitude of the individual causes him or her to live immorally as a result of spiritual influence. Some individuals put on rings whilst they are not married. This gives chance for evil attack on the individual. Others also take in alcohol in public, which also has spiritual influence. Generational curse. As example is set from the book of Joshua, chapter 7. Generational curse influence the individual to live such life. When the family has the history of being influenced by certain bad behavior like stealing or fornication. Some cultural practices also brings about spiritual influence on the individual to live immoral behavior. Covenant with witchcraft. Evil spirit can influence an individual to live a certain way of life, which may not have his or her consent, but since the individual is possessed, the person will live such a life. And also serving on demonic altars. Most homes or families where altars have been built invokes different kind of spirits. Most of such spirits has negative influence. They end up leading the individual to live according to how they want. So such people are seen in the public as bad people or people who practice immoral behavior, but may have been influenced by external spirits. Because of this, one must escape and place value on him or herself. Influence of the Word of God. Influence of the Word of God also helps the individual cure his mind and him or herself from bad deeds. which helps him or her to escape or abstain from immoral behavior. When there is the influence of the Word of God in your mind, it helps you to wait upon His time and trust in Him. This also helps you not to be in a rush to take personal decisions which will in turn leading you into distraction. For everything there is a season and a time, for every matter under heaven. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verse 1. One must secure himself or herself by trying to live a moral life. This can help the individual to escape many problems in life. The individual takes decisions, and whatever decision you take affects you, even your future. So whatever decision you take has consequences over your life, and therefore must be taken with caution. And it is more appropriate to seek advice from the Word of God as a Christian. This will help you to avoid a lot of things that affect others negatively as a result of their actions. We must learn to avoid friends and individuals who attempt to have bad influence over us. Since we are humans, it's likely we can give in to certain influence. So it's appropriate to escape from such people, not to waste time to listen to them and seek for directions from the Word of God. The Word of God enlightens and shines on your ways. The Word of God helps you to know the truth, and the truth sets you free. It also releases you from the state of ignorance to a point where you cannot be easily deceived because you know what you are about. Have a focus and a purpose in life so that nothing external can change your goals and aspirations in life. Thank you for watching this video. We encourage you to share it with your friends and family. I invite you to join the CC Moral family through the WhatsApp number, and also you can visit our website on ccmoral.webs.com.